But we now do move to our second session, where the panel are going to discuss relationships and sexuality. And our chair for this panel discussion is Suzy Byrne, and I know she and the panel members will be taking their positions on the stage while I'm speaking. But before introducing Suzy, I do want to convey my sympathy to her and her colleagues in the National Advocacy Service on the recent passing of their colleague Mark O'Connor and his wife and his son. We're thinking of you, Suzy, and your colleagues and all those who knew Mark at this very difficult time. Suzy is a regional manager for the National Advocacy Service for people with disabilities in Greater Dublin, and she's previously worked as a senior advocate for the service. And Suzy's currently a director of Erin Road Éireann and is a former board member and chairperson of the Irish Council of Civil Liberties, with a background in community and voluntary sector for over 35 years. She has a particular interest in family law, reproductive and LGBTIQ+ rights, and has advised on national policy and research projects in these fields for many years. So many thanks for joining us today, Suzy, and I'm very happy to hand over the floor to you and your panel members for this session. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks very much for returning from coffee. This promises to be a really interesting session. I am delighted that the NDA invited me to chair the session. I have a personal and professional interest in the area, and I suppose one of the things to remark on is that over 20 years ago, my late friend Declan O'Keefe and myself first worked with the NDA on a piece of desktop research on LGBT issues in Ireland for people with disabilities. And so here we are still talking about things, but great to see that the NDA and others are still progressing matters, and we now have the convention hopefully to guide us and well, more than guide us along the way, tell us exactly what we should be doing. And it's great to have this conference today. I suppose also maybe just to note, in terms of the National Advocacy Service, these issues are our bread and butter in terms of supporting people with their rights to sexual expression, to parenting, for reproductive rights, including in terms of the work of people who are having children removed from them under the Child Care Act, but also in terms of family law, in terms of access, and also applying to the HSE for supports, those supports that were talked about with the chair of the previous panel, in terms of who provides the supports to parents who have a disability in their parenting role. That question is still to be answered to this day, I have to say, and I think it's one that needs to be tackled in terms of ensuring that parents who may need a personal assistant or other types of support are not afraid to ask for it and will get it. And I think those issues hopefully will be addressed today and later this afternoon. And I suppose, without further ado, I'm going to call on the panel to, they will be timed, they will be told when they have to stop, all of those things. I have no role in this. The screens take over our lives, right? Okay? So just, I suppose, to say thank you to the panel for joining us today. Looking forward to your interventions. First of all, to introduce Jennie Williams, who is the founder and Chief Executive Officer of Enhance the UK. I think Jennie is going to stand as she addresses us. And so over to you, Jennie.
Thank you very much. No, I'm going to stand. And the reason I'm going to stand is, as a deafened person, I like to see in the souls of the people that I'm speaking to. So, hello, thank you very much for having me. And so just a little bit of background, who I am and why I'm called Enhance the UK. I set the charity up 17 years ago, and I couldn't have really dreamed that it would be any bigger than what it was. Hence the Enhance the UK, and now we work all over. But for you to understand how I got to setting the charity up, my background is social care. I always worked as a carer, worked in care homes, and I'm sure many people in this room, similar backgrounds. And when I was working as a carer and project worker in various different roles, I was, the older I was getting, I started quite a young age, I was going in and I was really noticing that, why is everybody sleeping in single beds? I haven't slept in a single bed since I was a child. Why is everyone, and some carers that I was speaking to were saying, oh, Dave and Jane, they're holding hands again, and they're grown-ups. I mean, they probably want to potentially do more than that. And then I started really questioning and looking at people's care plans and thinking, well, wait a minute, we've got all this information in people's care plans about everything about someone's life when they go to the toilet, what they eat, all these personal things. What information is in people's care plans around, well, we use the term sexual identity now and sexual expression, don't we? But anything to do with sex, sexual expression. And I started going through the care plans and very quickly realising that there was not even nothing in there. There was no section for anything like that to be written in there. So then I started asking the questions, why? Why are we not talking about this? And the door was shut in my face quite continuously. So I had two things going on. Personally, as a disabled person myself, I was like, I'm feeling really uncomfortable with this. It feels like infantilisation hugely. And also professionally. And then I started looking at, right, how do people who live in these care homes, so I was going around to lots of different care homes, look up information around anything to do with sex, actually, sexual health even, or they couldn't because there was a child lock on the internet. So people couldn't access that. Now, has that changed now? No. Nearly every care home I go into, there is still that child lock. And we'll come to that in a minute. So there was this massive pushback. So actually, I decided in my, ignorance, whatever, that setting up a charity would be a good thing to do. And so I did. And what I will say is I wouldn't have dreamed all those years ago we would be in this situation talking about sex so openly and disability. So I think we really have to remember how far we've come in many ways, because I've been banging this drum, as it were, for many, many years now. So I do think we have to recognise that as well. But also, when I was looking at people's care plans, looking at care staff, etc., the thing that I kept really having to remind myself is we have huge expectations on care staff professionals to be able to comfortably have these conversations with people about sex. And I think that's really unfair. Because there are lots of people who personally don't feel comfortable about talking about sex. They don't even know, let's talk about care staff here, don't even know the names of their genitals themselves. They don't ever look at themselves, let alone having to support other people. So for me, the key and the running theme of all of this is about education. And we have to remember a lot of disabled people, particularly people who have physical disabilities, and I do have to say around the terminology, in Enhance the UK, we adhere to the social model of disability, and we use the term disabled people, and we're a user-led disability charity, and that's the term that we use, which is interchangeable. So, but if you're reliant on care staff, you're reliant on PAs, a lot of care staff get paid very poorly. There's very little training, or there's very little importance put in training. So how do we expect people to then do something that's really, really personal? So with that, I decided that I was going to set the charity up a little bit like a social enterprise and create some training. So we have accredited training for care staff, for healthcare professionals, to be able to give people the confidence to actually have these conversations. And part of the problem is that when we're working with other people, we bring our values along the way. They might be religious values a lot of the time, and our beliefs. And actually, we need to learn how do we deal with facts. And that is a discipline in itself. So I think from all the way from care staff, all the way up to consultants, there needs to be an element of training how we have these conversations, how we start up these conversations, how we feel, how important we put them up the list of when we're talking and supporting people. So with that, we also really recognise that disabled people themselves need a space to be able to be seen and heard. And actually, that is very elitist because sometimes it's counselling. And counselling, then people think you need psychosexual therapy. The waiting list for that is absolutely huge. A lot of people don't need that. They just need to be able to have a conversation with somebody. So we set up something called the Love Lounge. I've got a snazzy little flyer here. So we set up the Love Lounge. There are flyers here if anybody wants them. So it's a free service. It's a free service for disabled people and their partners, if they want to come along and have 3 free sessions via Zoom. And actually, normally, that's all people actually want and need. And a lot of the time, we have people, actually, the biggest group of people that we have coming through are men, and mainly neurodivergent men, interestingly. But we have all different kind of people. Sometimes, women are coming along who are petrified about having a smear test because they've never had anything inserted inside them before, let alone then going and having a smear test. So a lot of the time, it's about giving that person some really basic practices before they get anywhere near a dilator or anything, or a speculum, like how we can actually work in getting used to your own body. There's a lot of internalised ableism, there's a lot of internalised shame. We were working with a man the other day who had MS, again, massive internalised ableism, to the point he was so lonely, and he said, all I want is the touch of a woman on the shoulder. That's what I want. To the point he was seriously considering going abroad and applying for the euthanasia project scheme, whatever it's called. And that was a really hard session because the question was, are you doing this because you have MS or are you doing this because you're lonely? Hands down, he said, because I'm so lonely. I don't want to live like this. I need that interaction. So, my time is looking at me. So, I really passionately believe that training and education is the key to changing all of this. Training for healthcare professionals, and not just around this, general basic disability awareness training. We have this assumption, because we go into care work, or we go into nursing, we go into work as in an OT, etc., that training happens. I can tell you it does not. It doesn't. So basic training is needed, but again, when we talk about budgets, that side of things left out, or people are saying we can do this in an hour. We have many, many deaf people, myself included. I will tell you a very personal story. I was having a procedure done. Everybody around me had masks on. I couldn't hear what was going on. Apparently they asked for my consent. I didn't hear. And next thing, I was having a biopsy done. And I was at the gynaecologist, that's what I need to say. It was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. And I do this for a living. I'm a CEO of a disability charity that does this for a living, and that happened to me. Basic training didn't happen. Nobody thought to take out their masks, and so I could lip read. So I will absolutely stop now, but there are lots of flyers here. If anyone works in any settings, if you want to come up, take the flyers, disseminate them around. Like I said, it's not just the UK. People can come on Zoom, so you can be anywhere in the world and access it. Okay, thank you very much.
I think this is the beginning of a very long conversation. I think a lot of people will be wanting to talk to you after this session today in terms of what was developed and what might be possible to develop here to support people. Because I know there's a willingness amongst many people working in services, many people in disabled people's organisations to develop this and develop responses. The people who've put together this programme, there is a theme here, so it follows on well in terms of Nicole Lamb is our next speaker, who's the Guidance and Development and Research Lead for the National Disability Quality Improvement Team in the HSE, and Nicole is going to speak to us about new guidance from the section on promoting healthy relationships and sexuality. So Nicole, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzy. I'm going to sit down, but I'm just going to grab the clicker. Hi everyone, my name's Nicole, and I'm just going to describe what I look like. I'm an Asian woman with short shoulder-length hair, and I wear glasses. My background is in sociology and education, but I've been working in disability research for 6 years now, and I'm really delighted to present the launch of this guidance here. I know there's many people who worked on this guidance in the room, and maybe virtually as well, so thank you to the expert advisory group. This research was really personal to me as well, as a classic late diagnosed neurodivergent person who's queer. I was really touched by the work done in the focus groups, but also I saw that in the research and the international literature review that we still have a lot of catching up to do in Ireland. I think Jennie really speaks to that. These things are happening in other countries. So just some background on... Ooh, is that working? Yeah. Just some background on how we came up with the guiding principles. We started a group and invited representatives from disabled people's organisations, staff, NGOs, family members, and that group then would decide on the research questions to find out where we'd go with the guidance. And these kind of questions were put into the HSC librarian, but also we asked our focus groups questions along those themes. And we wanted to find out what disabled people's experiences were with relationships and sexuality, their experiences with education, and their experience of expressing their sexuality, and any outcomes that are associated with disabled people not having healthy relationships and sexuality, which I think we've heard some of that already today. And from looking at the literature review, this was probably one of the bigger literature reviews that I've done in my role, because I think a lot of you know there's a lack of research, especially Irish research, with disabled people. But for this one, it was overwhelming. We found over 88 articles. And for focus groups, we did 6 all over the country, and some of them were online. So combining all those sources of information, we came up with some themes. And really rich data. I won't go through all of it today, but I do have the literature review printed out for the 2 people who might want to read something that long. I have the guiding principles printed out as well on the table, if you want to have a look. But some of the themes were about post-decongregation and post-institutionalization, the historical and cultural remnants of that in Irish society, the lacking education around sex ed for everyone, but especially for disabled people, it was risk-based. And one thing that really came across was this early construction of disabled people as either asexual, childlike, or hypersexual, and unequipped to deal with sexuality or to make decisions. Queer disabled people faced extra stigma about their sexuality. In one focus groups, one person told us that they were teased about holding hands with someone in front of their peers. Disabled women were still facing forced or non-consensual contraception, and women of colour, especially black women, were experiencing medical racism. In terms of education, which is a huge piece of this work, co-learning and peer training was something that in the research, in the literature review and the focus groups, was something that everyone wanted. And that education wasn't just about basic concepts. They wanted to learn more about abstract things, like what intimacy looks like for them, and what it could look like in an environment that was accessible to them, what social cues look like, what does a non-romantic relationship look like versus a romantic one, and what are those scripts, because we've heard already that disabled people internalize a lot of the things that people say or the system has arranged them to behave in. Another thing that came up in the research was parenthood. It was not a topic that disabled people knew about or heard about because it was dissuaded by their support network, and they never saw that as an option to them. And then finally, something else that came up in the research was the hierarchy of disabilities, and that people with intellectual disabilities were seen as the least attractive in terms of partnership. So those were the themes that came up. And I guess our job in the expert advisory group, and my job as a guidance and research lead is to translate those themes into some principles for services, individuals, really for anyone who cares about the quality of life for everyone, and especially for disabled people. Because a lot of these changes are systemic, but it's cultural, and it's that shift in mindset, being able to have conversations about these topics that a lot of non-disabled people often shy away from anyways. So they face the extra barrier when talking about it in terms of disabled people. So these are the principles that we came up with. In the actual document itself, they are elaborated. So under autonomy, we talk about the right to make decisions about your body, relationships, and sexual expression, and being able to identify and overcome those barriers. Under choice, we have things about informed choices in relationships and sexuality, the right to make mistakes and to learn from them like everyone else does. Under human rights, we talk about intersectionality, and to be able to be recognized as a full person with sexual agency and sexual rights, the right to live free from discrimination, abuse, stigma, and harmful stereotypes. We talk about consent and access, so that's in relation to the right to make consensual decisions and for them to be respected. The right to accessible spaces that accommodate their needs, provide opportunities to meet people, and for their privacy to be respected. And finally, the two categories there, education for the person and for the supporter. I'm going to elaborate on the education for the person just to give people a flavour of what that looks like. So we have there, the person has the right to lifelong comprehensive and accessible education about relationships. We also have there the person should expect to be included in formal education, and that if formal education isn't accessible, additional supports should be there to facilitate those conversations. In this document, we also include a section for society should or supporters can. And here we have supporters can ensure that disabled people have access to accessible and quality sex education, and support education that counters stigma and promotes relationships and sexuality as a natural part of life. And again, this is something that we see being carried out in the UK and Australia, and it came across in the research as well that people really wanted people with the same disability or impairment as them to be delivering that training so that they would understand what access needs they have. But I wanted to finish off just with our website, that you can find these guiding principles next week because it's the HSC and it'll take us some time to upload this onto the website. That's all I'm saying. That's my email there if you want to talk more about the research, because there is lots in there that I would love to talk more about, but I've 1 minute left, and I just want to say that one of the things is I really want us to think about the creative solutions, but also the small moments of conversations you have with each other, and what we kind of default to, or what we think. I think all we can do is promote these values and ideas to everyone around us, and to challenge stereotypes of disabled people as not able to have relationships, parenthood. These are rights that we all need to look at how we can dismantle those barriers to. And I'm really excited that there's a room full of people who are ready to engage in those conversations. So thank you.
Maybe just click on to the next slide.
Thank you so much, Nicole. From next week, we are now all armed and dangerous. We have this guidance in our back pockets as people who use services, people who run services, and people who work in advocacy, where we can hopefully use this guidance. And I have lots of questions. I won't leash them on you now. But yeah, this is great. Thanks a million. And it's definitely from, in terms of your passion for the project and the depth that you've talked about the research and everything as well. It's a great job, well done, and we look forward to seeing it get out there. Next, we're moving on to Jack Kavanagh. And Jack is probably known to many of you in terms of his work as a non-executive director, as a board member of the NDA. as a speaker and a pharmacist. But for me, Jack is the person who's going to get us all on a plane and sit in a seat that we will be comfortable on, our own wheelchairs if we so choose. Now, Jack, no pressure now. I was the woman that was told that I was going to be the person that would get everybody on trains in Ireland, and I've been living that down for the last 7 years, right? So no pressure. But Jack, you're going to talk to us today about personal assistance and its role in supporting people in living their lives that they're choosing, I think. So over to you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, well, look, we set ambitions, we don't make promises. No, it's a big stretch. Big stretch goal. A couple of months ago, I got an email from Kieran, and since then, I've been kind of thankful to him, but also cursing him. This is the second time I've had the chance to speak publicly about relationships, intimacy, sexuality, and the intersection with being a person and happening to have a disability as well. The first time came about a couple of years ago. And actually, before I go on, can I check? Jenny, can you lip read me?
I'm just doing a side lip read. Thanks for checking. Yeah, no, I'm good.
Do you
thank
want
you.
to move, or do you want me to?
No, honestly, don't worry. Thank you.
Anybody else lip reading? Okay. And for anyone with a visual impairment, my dating profile used to say, I'm simultaneously 6'1" and 4 foot something. So I'm a wheelchair user. I'm wearing a dotted T-shirt or dotted shirt. So the first chance I got to speak about this was a number of years ago. I got a request to come and join for an interview on the Tommy Tiernan show. And anybody that has seen the Tommy Tiernan show knows that if you get into the chair there, you are in the dragon's den and anything can happen. Any topic is on the table, but you know for sure that when someone like me arrives into the room, there's going to be one thing he's going to want to ask you about. And so sex came up, and I had to invite him in because he was dancing around the topic. And I said, Tommy, come on, will you just ask the question? And over the next little while, we talked about, the similarities with so many others that have sexual lives. I was not long out of college at the time, and I talked about experiences of one-night stands and, the hot and heavy, and then the point arrives, well, I will actually need a hand taking my trousers off, and that's okay. And then we moved on to this idea that communication is so important. And that's true of any relationship, be it a benign relationship or an intimate relationship, be it a relationship with family, friend, or an intimate partner. And certainly it's the case when you bring in people that may be supporting, be it a personal assistant or anything like that, into the mix. It's increasingly important that communication is to the forefront. When we talk about relationships and sexuality in the context of disability, we're really talking about human rights. We're talking about the right to love, the right to connection, the right to a sliding scale of intimacy, both understanding that and being educated about that for the individual person, and the importance of exploring that with a partner, if you so choose. We're talking about the right to have privacy in doing that, and where support is required, that what happens in that context remains private. And really importantly, to make decisions about our own lives such that we remain independent, autonomous, agentic people. For many people with a disability or disabled people, depending on how you identify, including myself, that right's deeply connected to personal assistance, which I do require at times during the day. And having that support really enables me and many others to live equally, hopefully to live independently and to lead engaged lives. And personal assistance, in my experience, can be hugely enabling for those that require those services to have relationships with others, be they intimate partners, friends, parents, just like anyone else. So over the years, I have required personal assistance services since acquiring a spinal cord injury at the age of 20. And I went through my college years, and post-injury, I was unboxing many different things over time and reintegrating them into my lives, and dating and relationships was one of those things. I had real struggle about, or doubt about, you know, will I, as I came to terms with myself and how my body operated post-injury, about how will I be a sexual being. I still very much had wants and desires. I wondered, would I be wanted by others? And as time went on, and my level of comfort and acceptance and understanding of myself and what my body wanted and was capable of, I decided to re-engage in dating and relationships. I remember a friend of mine made a deal with me that he was fully able-bodied and he was grappling with this stuff just as much as I was. And we made a deal in September that we'd each go on 3 dates before Christmas. And then I ended up with a girlfriend. And, you know, over those years during college, I had many experiences just like my friends. And it became a sliding scale of learning about what does sexuality and relationships. Sexuality is a part of a relationship, but it's also part of being an individual outside of a relationship look like. And importantly, like where do I exist at different times on the sliding scale of intimacy? And, you know, that might start with something, to compare it to a curry that's quite mild, and go all the way up to something that's quite spicy. And then within the exploration of all of that was me engaging with personal assistance. And as I have sort of entered into a longer relationship, the way that personal assistants have supported the relationship and me in a relationship has been really interesting, because sexuality is a part of that, but also there's so many other parts of a relationship outside of that. You know, if you're not contributing to the household and putting away the dishes and supporting with the washing and the cleaning of the floors, you can forget the rest of it. And there are negotiations that are happening in every relationship. Esther Perel does this great piece about, you know, the next intimate interaction begins at the end of the last one, and it involves lots of moments of, you know, mundane things, of shared responsibilities, of showing respect to each other, of interest and so on. And in my case, in a relationship, that means that there's parts of the duties of the household that I have to take ownership of, or slack that I need to take off my partner at different times. And that involves me utilizing a personal assistant for certain parts of that. And with that, the personal assistant becomes a huge enabler of connection for me within a relationship. There's a huge amount that needs to be accounted for there in terms of communication and laying out of boundaries that are respectful, both to protect the personal assistant, but also for me and my partner to have a discussion about how much support is enough. at what times and in what places. Where do we want to have privacy, and where do we want that support to be welcomed in? There's a huge amount of trust that comes into this kind of dynamic as well. And there is elements that, from my experience, someone coming into a role as a personal assistant gets very little training around. I've been so fortunate that I've had incredible people work with me over the years. And I would very much agree with Jennie when she said, you know, massively underpaid for the incredible roles that they deliver, and the support that I and many others would be lost without. And importantly, until next week, maybe the opportunities for learning about the many nuanced elements of how to begin the discussions and the supports around not just supporting people in a relationship, but the nuances that exist both inside and outside of a relationship around that sliding scale of intimacy, of sexuality. That's certainly not been present or prevalent in the training of any of the personal assistants that I have used. And within that comes all of the cultural and value beliefs and so on that differ for so many people. So look, I'd love to say it's straightforward, that there's simple answers. It's very nuanced, and it does involve ongoing education, which I'm delighted to hear from our last two panelists and the work that's been done. And I'm delighted just to get the chance to platform it in some way from a lived experience and to say, this is normal, and we do live on the sliding scale of nice to spice that everyone else does as well. And yeah, before I get myself in trouble, I'm going to show.
Thank you so much, Jack. I think you'll be speaking about this subject quite a bit more on the basis of that intervention. I have been in rooms over the last 30 years where people who are PA users and PAs have had conversations, cloaked conversations sometimes, you know, and I've also, you know, had conversations with my friends, you know, about these intimate spaces and all of the issues that come from it. And we're, you know, it's great that you're talking about this in this way. I think the conversations are needed continuously amongst ourselves as disabled people on this, so that we are comfortable around it, because we know that people are navigating these spaces. Unfortunately, service providers haven't been navigating those spaces, neither have the service commissioners. And I think it's also important to say, like, that those who are commissioning service providers have not seen people's right to a relationship, to sexual expression and intimacy as a core fundamental value in the provision of services. In the same way, it's all about getting us out of bed and maybe some personal care, and that's it. But anything else beyond that, like work, education, going for a pint, or having a relationship or parenting a child, is off the table in terms of funding in many cases. So we've a long way to go, but it's so important to have these discussions for people who are navigating those spaces, to talk about it and to give everybody else the permission to talk about it and to demand for change and seek change. So thanks very much, Jack.
Could I say one very last thing?
Yeah.
The reason why it's really important that we hear stories from those living lives is that stories are sticky. I've said it in many contexts before, but stories are very sticky, and if we platform stories of people having these conversations, of discussing these things in appropriate environments and so on, you break down taboos, and you give permission for humanity to sort of common humanity to prevail, and for those that maybe have grown up or been brought up in slightly closeted environments based on regulation and service provision that's existed previously, you can really open a whole new world by changing the stories that they're exposed to.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jack. Thank you. I don't want to eat into Derval's time, she'll kill me. Okay, next, many of you will know Derval McDonagh, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Inclusion Ireland and has a background in supporting the rights of people with disabilities within service provision. You know, Derval, I'm very much looking forward to hear what you have to say today in terms of the Irish context and people with intellectual disabilities supporting rights in this space.
Thank you so much, Suzy. A real honour and a privilege to be here with you all today, with thanks to the NDA for the invitation. And as a proud queer neurodivergent woman myself, what could be more important than talking about relationships and sexuality together? Something that's so fundamental for all of us, and yet for the community that I work alongside and have the privilege to work alongside every day, something that for many people remains unspoken and not talked about. So I was asked today to touch on some of the barriers that our community face from our experience at Inclusion Ireland. But for any of you who know me and have heard me speak before, I'll always kind of take it a little bit deep first and go backwards, because I think we can't possibly hope to unpick any of those barriers if we don't reckon fully with our history in Ireland. And to us at Inclusion Ireland, we've a long story, and actually I resent calling it a history in a way, because it is a story that is still unfolding of the mass segregation and isolation of people with an intellectual disability and their families. And I suppose it was up until the 1990s, and even later than that, it was very typical to offer a place in an institution to a newborn baby with an intellectual disability. And that story, it still exists today. It's just been kind of repackaged in a way. And we call that at Inclusion Ireland institutionality. It's the firmly held belief that institutions have the answers rather than people or communities. And if we don't grapple with that story fully, we risk repeating those patterns of segregation and isolation, removing people from their really natural supports, community and family. So in recognising this pattern, we often see that we close one institution and open another. So I know we are working really hard on closing down what is called, a terrible term, congregated settings. And in some ways that has been done in some areas in an incredibly mindful, skilled way, that we refuse to have the same patterns of isolation and segregation. But we also know that sometimes when we moved on from the larger settings, we just set up a whole pile of smaller settings with the smaller institutional settings with the same rules and the same constraints on people's lives. And we've got to recognise that. But what is more insidious than all of that is that we hold on to somehow that thinking, that institutionalised thinking, that people don't have the same human needs or rights as everybody else, that don't have the same needs or rights to belong, to have sexual relationships, to be in relationship with one another, and we continue to keep people separate. And this permeates, then we see it kind of replaying, and I'm just going to call out, just a couple of examples of this that we observe and that our members tell us about every day. The repercussions are really significant. And I know, on a hopeful note, we've a real, I suppose, opportunity with the new National Disability Strategy, which has a focus on human rights, to unpick this over the next number of years. But if I take children and families first, and in the context of Article 23, children with a disability having the right to family life as well. But what generally our members tell us in that, on discovering, their child is disabled at birth or later, there's a particular thing that happens, and suddenly you're on this train towards special. And you're being told to fight to get on a waiting list, and you do all those things as a parent. And you might have to wait on that waiting list for access to these kind of services and supports, and that might be for 3 years or 4 years. And in that precious time over those first few years, we miss something so incredibly important. We miss that the most important thing here is supporting families to build their own resilience, to connect to their own communities, and to have valuable connections around them in their lives. And we leave people in that limbo. So we have an opportunity to change that narrative in the early years, and I think we have to do that because that's where the separation starts, the disconnect from community, the disconnect from relationships, and the disconnect from those natural supports. And that the impact of that lasts a lifetime. So it's really time to change that conversation and that narrative. The other hangover that we see to that institutional thinking is, as I mentioned, that progress in people moving out of large-scale institutions, and there's no doubt that is happening. And some of those processes were managed so well, but we have to watch out for those. Just because you're living in a smaller home doesn't mean you're not living in an institution. And the hallmarks of an institution are, if you didn't have choice about where you live, who you live with, and most importantly, how you live your life, then you are still living in an institution, even if it looks nicer and it's smaller. So we have to remember that. So now that we know that's, I've taken you on that bit of a brief history of everything, and now that we know where we're come from, it's easy to see then why these barriers still exist right now in our attitudes and our values and beliefs about sexuality and relationships. So what we do know is that, obviously, and all the other panelists have spoken about, the cultural and social barriers that people with an intellectual disability face, the attitudes and stereotypes, people not being seen as sexual beings, or people who can have deep and meaningful friendships. And that bit, Jennie, it so resonates with me about the lack of training, and I'd add to that the lack of appropriate, accessible and available training that would be available system-wide. We know it's happening in pockets across the country, and there's good people trying to do good work, but it is a bit of a scattergun approach. I suppose the overall biggest barrier, though, that we come across is the idea that, and the kind of attitude that's out there, that if we don't talk about this, it will just go away, and then that will mean it's not happening. But actually, we know people are having relationships, but they're probably less safe, less pleasurable, and causing all sorts of risks in people's lives. So we need to give people the information so that people can make informed choices about their own bodies, their own lives, their own autonomy. The best safeguards in life, and I know there's so much talk about safeguarding legislation and all of that, but the best safeguards are a life of freedom, choice and autonomy over yourself, and having the information to make good decisions about what feels good, what feels bad, and what's right for me. Recently, we held an event for people with intellectual disabilities and their families to come together. That's an unusual kind of an event, and we were really happy to host it, which is to talk together about what positive, hopeful futures could look like. Because sometimes all the people are hearing is, I need to fight for services, and that's what's going to bring my good life. But actually, we know there's a whole world that exists outside of all of that. And we're really fortunate at that event to have an amazing group of neurodivergent and intellectually disabled researchers led by the wonderful Jess Mannion. I believe she's online today, and they're called Disabilities Without Borders. And they shared with us their research on relationships, sexuality and belonging, and these findings absolutely confirm the barriers I've outlined. But what I found hopeful about the session with people and their families was the openness. Sometimes there's a lot of blame bandied about when it comes to this stuff, but in a carefully facilitated space, we all realised the importance of information as an empowering factor for our loved ones, and the fact that relationships, whether friendships, romantic or otherwise, are incredibly important, and that we all wanted to figure out how to support each other better. More of these supportive, non-blame, non-judgmental conversations are necessary to move that taboo and that dial. And we can't shy away from the fact that, abuse and terrible things are happening. But by getting into that space of a facilitated conversation, we can start to change. And that gives me hope. Days like this give me hope that we're connecting here together and we're learning from each other, and I'm sure there's going to be many conversations afterwards together about the next steps. I suppose my final thoughts are that, to belong to one another and to belong in our communities, we must first belong to ourselves. We must understand that it is a right for us, what feels good, what feels safe, what feels right. So thank you.
Thank you very much. thanks so much, Derval, for your wisdom on this and the challenges that we face ahead of us. We have had the session extended by a few minutes, so we're eating into your lunchtime, but I'm sure you will agree, given the inputs that we've had here, that it is definitely worth it. I'm going to go to the floor first in terms of taking questions first, and I have a number of questions online also, and I also probably will try and encourage those who haven't asked a question already, if I can express a preference there, if that's okay. Sorry, now I can't see a question. I've somebody at the back here. Michael.
Can everybody hear me okay? Hi everyone, my name is Michael, and I work in As I Am, so thanks to the panel for sharing their contributions today. And Jack, you referenced you mentioned the word taboo, this being a taboo topic for people to have these conversations. And I think about my own brother who's 16 with an intellectual disability in an autism class, and I know that he hasn't experienced or received any information within his own school setting around consent or about sexuality as a topic, because it's presumed or it's assumed that he doesn't have the capacity to understand, but also that he won't experience those situations that many people experience. So I think it's important that as we reflect on this conversation, that we start within our educational system as well to try and encourage and empower young people who have an intellectual disability or who are disabled to have access to information that is accessible, but also then sets them up for success as they journey through this particular experience in life. So, thank you.
Can I reply to that?
Jennie.
No, I just to reply to that, I think this, you're absolutely right, and I think there are two things. One, we always seem to put in, safeguarding is the key word, is it safeguarding? But actually what happens is we safeguard so much, we're putting on the most restrictive option, we're not looking at anything else, and it's exactly as you said, then really detrimental things happen, because things happen anyway. And sex education, when you in school, sex education, you're not taught about pleasure.
Yeah.
And I understand that, we understand why. But then as you get older, there are lots of people, particularly with physical disabilities, who are not understanding that they shouldn't be in pain. And then that's when things are happening. So again, it's that education to the parents, isn't it? Education to healthcare professionals as well, is that people should be able to make mistakes. We all make mistakes in life. They just can't be so safeguarded to the inch of their lives that people are just making terrible, catastrophic mistakes as a result.
There's a question over there.
Is there?
Thanks very much, Fiona Byrne. I just want to say, just in relation to the personal assistance, and it's more of a comment, just the right to apply for personal assistance, to get personal assistance for psychosocial disability, and the discrimination there. And we certainly have members that cannot have relationships, that could have had relationships, that might have had family, might have had the opportunity to have family, and still can't. Because of the discrimination that's there, and I'm not sure you're aware of that, Nicole, within HSE, discrimination around assessment of needs, around provision of personal assistance, and we have IREC funding cases to the Work Relations Commissions, and no systemic change there. And just in relation to the National Disability Strategy, just remember the people whose voices aren't there, because ours certainly weren't included in no shape or form, and any oversight in relation to anything. Do you know? But thanks very much. And just also, Derval, you really are amazing, and I'm advocating for over 10 years, some of us for decades, and very rarely do we meet anybody that says, I want to know if we're saying or do anything in our organisation that's not inclusive, that's not respectful of the CRPD, that doesn't hear other voices. And it's pretty almost unique, to be honest. And just to thank you for that. But the other presentations as well, they were all excellent. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to go to online for a minute while you set up the next question from the floor. There's a fundamental one here that maybe all of you can talk about, really, which is the role that stereotypes like infantilization or desexualization play in denying disabled people their rights under Article 23. If you'd want to, anyone would like to comment on any aspect of that.
I just want to say thank you for turning the lights down a
Yes,
little bit.
thank you.
But I wanted to comment on that as well with the research. That was something that was came across very strongly, and especially with people with an intellectual disability. I think we've heard over and over again that from childhood, because of terms like safeguarding and that idea of overprotectiveness, that kind of turns into a script that people internalize from a very young age, right? That people are desexualized and are seen to not have the capacity to be in romantic relationships. And like what Jennie said, what that turns into then is when they do have an interest to engage in sexual relationships or romantic relationships, they're seen as hypersexual then and almost deviant in the way they act. Or it's weird that they would want to be sexual or be in a romantic relationship. And it's only weird because we don't see disabled people as full beings. And also, like what Derval said, it's that institutional mindset that a lot of people still have. And I think we carry a lot of that with us, even if we're healthcare workers or professionals who don't work directly with disabled people often. We will still engage with disabled people in different settings in our lives, and that's something that I really want, us to think about, the people that we do come in contact with. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to contribute, or will I keep going with questions?
Just a little tiny bit. Just to really hammer home the point, though, about coming back into with care staff. If care staff are so frightened of being prosecuted, so frightened of being sent to prison, for something, for touching inappropriately or saying the wrong words, or again, it comes back down to that, doesn't it? You can have the best policies in the world, you can have the best procedures in the world, but if people aren't reading them, understanding what they actually mean, and know how to implement them confidently, they are worthless. They're not. They might as well not be there. So it comes back down to that. You can clearly see why this is happening, can't you? Otherwise, we're talking into an echo chamber. It needs to go all the way down to the bottom. That's where you've got to start.
There's some great comments and feedback in these presentations, including that Jack's honesty and clarity of thought was exceptional. There's really important topics, and that Jennie's work is inspiring. There are also questions that we are not going to solve today, but I'm going to mention them because I think they're important. Marriage inequality, relationship inequality, due to the failure to remove the means test for disability allowance. Yeah. We as disabled people do not have the rights to live and have an independent means. Our means are tested against those of our partners. That exposes us to abuse, neglect, the costs of disability, and it wasn't tackled in this budget. And there's a question here about the anomaly and how it can be addressed and what we can build solidarity and awareness of the issue. I think there's a lot more disabled people talking out about that at the moment. I think there are campaigns being built on that, and I think we need the agencies that provide us with service and enforce our rights to fight for us with us on this issue, so that the cost of disability does not get removed because we're in love with somebody. Because that's what happens, and that also that people impute things about our relationships, that we should be financially dependent on somebody, in a way that able-bodied people wouldn't be, and things that are said. And there's another question here about, and I know, Derval, you referred to it in terms of abuse and those sort of things being important. And somebody's asked here about acknowledging that people with disabilities, particularly disabled women, I think it's also all people with disabilities, are at greater risk of intimate partner violence. And what can bodies such as CUAN, which is the new agency that looks after domestic gender-based violence, what can they do to address the specific risks that disabled women, disabled people face?
Yeah, there was a great piece of research just done last year with Women's Aid and some national DPOs, Disabled Women Ireland. We were involved a bit at Inclusion Ireland. I think Independent Living Movement Ireland are involved as well, Fiona. And I suppose it just really exposed the enormous barriers in the system, you know, people much more likely to be abused for sure. And then when they are, the barriers in terms of accessing support, inaccessible shelters, like lack of being believed, you know, people not being believed that they're being abused. So I think that's a really good research project. It made for incredibly tough reading. I think anybody who took part in it was incredibly courageous to do so and to have their voices heard. But now it's about action, and I think that research is out there now, and Oncún and others need to take really good stock of it and start making those changes.
Absolutely, I'd encourage everybody to have a look at it. I was one of the people that was involved in advising on it, and I know that we are wondering what's going to happen to the recommendations that are in it, both for Kuhn and the agencies they fund, and how we continue to involve the voices of disabled people, ensuring that services are fit for purpose and that the responses are there. I don't want to finish on such a negative note in terms of this session, which I think has been hugely important, and really the quality of the interventions have been excellent. Lots of food for thought. I'm sure you join me now in thanking our speakers for today and this session now. Thank you.